And welcome to Life Support Live, the weekly show that explores how Star Trek can help us to boldly go in our own lives to better ourselves and the rest of humanity.
As a certain famous starship captain once said, but as another famous starship captain also said, we will go wherever our mission takes us and have a little fun along the way.
Hello, everyone! I am psychologist Dr. Ali Mattu.
And I'm Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek. One of us is a real doctor.
And we'll leave it to you to figure out who that might be. On this week's episode, we're talking about rules. When to follow them, when to break them. There's a lot of times Star Trek breaks rules, and we'll talk about that in great detail. To start things off, let us know in the comments, what's your favorite example of a Star Trek episode where a character breaks the rules? Let us know in the comments. Larry, before we get into all of that, what is this? What are we doing here? What is Life
It's a
Support
big
Live?
mess. It's a big lake mess. That's what it is. No. Hey, everybody, listen, if you're new to Life Support Live, welcome. If you're part of our wonderful community, thanks for being back with us. No, we're here every week going boldly through uncertain times. We're bringing a lot of Star Trek geekery through a mental health lens. Or as we say sometimes, a lot of mental health through a big Star Trek lens. Whatever it is, we have a lot of fun. We have a theme, as you can see there. And it's based on, right now we're basing it off the current Lower Decks episode, but we extend that to all of Star Trek.
Yep.
And along the way, somehow, hopefully, manage to maybe give you some thoughts, some takeaways you can bring to your own life, even after we, yes, do plenty of geeking out through our time here. And with room for you to chat. See, there you go. And even later on, Skype or call in with us. We haven't had anybody try to Skype in a long time.
Yeah.
Dr. Ali.
So you can video in, or you can just call in too on Skype.
Yes.
And there's lots of ways to get involved. But that's our favorite part about this show, is talking to you, hearing from you, getting your thoughts, getting your perspectives. Larry and I spend a lot of time thinking about what we might want to talk about, and then it all changes when we actually have this conversation. So we're always looking forward to that. And this will be the last episode that's inspired by Lower Decks, and starting next week we're going to move on to Star Trek Discovery. Yeah, for now. But we're also, as we promised, we're going to do a watch party. We do these from time to time, and based on popular demand, that movie is going to be, drumroll, Star Trek First Contact, by popular demand.
You need a new drummer. Okay.
My degree is not in percussion,
okay.
Larry. So we'll talk on the Facebook group page, which if you're not a part of, definitely join that. Life Support
Why not?
Live.
Get there.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we'll find out what time works for everyone. We're gonna do it at a special time. So we'll have a lot of fun watching Star Trek First Contact together. But before we do that,
we're being pretty radical. Yes.
It's the 21st century. We have to be radical.
Well, radical times call for radical measures.
Yeah.
Hey, and may I say,
yes,
we did not celebrate this last week. Last week was our 25th show, so it was like our silver anniversary.
Right.
This is number 26 today.
We've
already.
I was looking at my notes for today. And
today's
like,
our half-year anniversary. Then.
Oh my gosh. We've been doing this for a half year.
We have been doing this for 6 months.
That is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
You would think our audience would be doing so much better, Mr. Carlin, but no. It's
that is so. We started this with the idea of doing it for the duration, and back then, Larry, we had no idea how long this would be going on for. And here we are half a year later. Well, Larry, I raised my rack de Gino to you on 26 on half year.
There we
I'd like
go.
to say to the next half year, but I also don't want it to be a half year because I want things to. I want to get rid of this pandemic.
Yeah, I don't want the linkage there. I also need to say today, just as a show off there, I'm doing this show during OU Texas. So here's
This
my
is
devotion to the cause. But yes, happy 6 month anniversary and happy belated silver anniversary or something. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. Well, that is if anyone knows Larry, he knows that is a big sacrifice that you are making. So I think you might be breaking one of your own rules here today for life support
Ooh.
live.
No, no, no.
Well, as folks who are new might not know, and as our regulars do know, we start the discussion with a little bit of just a non-spoiler discussion of the episode that inspired this week's theme. This week, that is the season 1 finale. Larry, I can't believe we just finished a whole season. A season 1 finale of Star Trek Lower Decks. And Larry, as I often do, I'd love to get your non-spoiler thoughts to start off this discussion.
I'll give you my non-spoiler thoughts too. Well, as usual, we're sitting here saying, "Wow, it's the season 1 finale of 10 half-hour shows." So just to say,
right. It's like 5 hours.
where did the time go? Yeah. No, I think there's been, for the folks who have either jumped in full-throated on Lower Decks, or a lot of people who needed some convincing, and that's not all fandom, I know, but for a lot of people that enjoyed the show or came to enjoy it as it went along, it was like a huge build. And I think I said last week on our air, I said I was thinking this is the most fully formed Star Trek right out of the box. Only rivaled by the original series, but I think the original series did a lot of unintended growing the first year. They didn't expect Kirk and Spock to be, even. It was going to be Kirk with these other guys, Second Banana, and then a bunch of other people. And it wound up being Kirk, Spock, and then McCoy in the triangle by the end of the first year. And a lot of the background concept totally flushed out as they went along, So I think even Lower Decks has, and again, this is 10 half hours versus 26 or 27 hours, but I think Lower Decks came out of the gate more fully formed than any other Star Trek has this year. So, but this finale was just amazing. It hit so many different notes on so many different levels. It's, nostalgia, throwbacks, Easter eggs, but its own people and arcs and people growing and all kinds of human emotions going on too. So, not to get too spoilery.
Yeah. There's a lot, and there's a lot we can't really talk about because it would spoil this episode. But what I'll say is this episode seemed to be a really great. Oh wow, Larry, am I going to say this? A really great Valentine to the fans. if anyone knows a reference to that, I know that
Rick,
thing.
You really want to?
Yeah. I thought it was there was a lot of love to the Star Trek franchise, and going to all the way in the beginning and the original series, the episode really starts with a very big nod to TOS, and it has a few other stops along the way, catching us up to now. There's some really great jokes in there. I will say I love episode 9 so much that it's really hard for me to judge episode 10 without really episode 9 just was
come out of your episode 9 haze there, Bucky.
I can't. It was so good. So it's hard for me to look at the season finale objectively. But there was a few themes that we were trying to draw from that were also not spoilery themes. And the one we came up with is rules. And one of the things that happens in this episode is we have two characters who have kind of represented two different sides, two different approaches to Starfleet. And what we see in this episode is one of the characters who is much more about following the rules, the captain, um, and the lower decker who's a little bit more.
Not about following rules for rules'
Not
sake.
about following the rules. Yeah. I would say she's a little bit more TOS. We're going to figure this out as we go along. Whereas the captain might be a little bit more TNG. Hey, the universe has its ways of working. We need to follow those. And we see a little bit of a coming together here. And I thought that was a really cool idea, Larry. And one that it's a very specific theme that we haven't explored before. We got a lot of great feedback about what we should talk about this week. And one of the things that we always lean heavily
Like
on
a pole
is
without a pole.
right. One of the things we always lean on is this something we have? Is this a new perspective we can bring to Star Trek? Something and a new perspective to our mental health. Something we haven't talked about before. And rules seem to be an interesting one.
Yeah, well, and I sent you another couple of images, but I think that dynamic of the rule follower and the rule breaker, and when one is a strength and when not, is there's also a dynamic of the two lower decker leads of Mariner and Boimler, and they're kind of the same way. He's the rule follower, she's the rule breaker, so it's almost like it's a two level. We're reinforcing that. What got me this time was there are a couple of moments there where. I love that. This moment here, it's like she's decided she's going to follow the rules in an exaggerated way, which drives him mad. It's like, oh no, you can't start this now for your own nefarious ends.
Even the speed walking, she's copying his speed walking.
Oh, she's bundled up her hair, and the speed walking and the sir, yes, sirs. So it was like, well, even following the rules can be abusive, if that makes sense.
Yes, and so where are those lines, and how do we know? Here she is with her Starfleet regulation. One of the things I really appreciate is Lower Decks has brought back the in tough times you kind of uncuff your uniform a little bit in much the same way as the from Wrath of Khan on with the original series cast we saw. I really like that. And there's a lot of great episodes that people have already mentioned in the comments that I want to bring up.
Wait, there's a chat over here. Oh my gosh.
We have a wonderful chat. And I know last week Ali really went on his soapbox about mental health, but we're going to be plugged in with the chat. So Zahir starts us off with Deep Space Nine in the Pale Moonlight. Star Trek 6. Christoph says Star Trek 6 had the most important rule violations. Also, another nod to In the Pale Moonlight. Jared says too many to list when it comes to the Prime Directive. Scott mentioning LOL Kirk breaks the Prime Directive all the time. Libby also bringing up some good ones. I think Bar Association, Libby, might be one of your favorite episodes because it comes up in a lot of recommendations. And I think it's right on here. Bar Association from DS9, Body Parts, another one, Lower Decks, every episode. That is definitely true.
Now, these are all great, and I'm sure we'll dance around a lot of these.
Yeah.
But the risk in having a topic like this, rules when to follow and when to break.
Yeah.
I was concerned that yes, exactly. Every Prime Directive conversation, every time Kirk talked down a computer, which has been referenced in Lower Decks.
Yes.
Made fun. Every time any captain made a huge decision. I mean, it's also called writing drama.
Right.
When people are breaking rules. So on one hand, I didn't want this to turn into let's just list all 47 million different ways, rules big and small. What I wanted to say, I wanted to draw a distinction between rules and let's say laws.
So that's a great
because I wanted to say this I wanted to bring this down to a more personal level.
Let's do that. And that's a great way to start our briefing room, Larry. So what's your distinction there?
Basically, I'm going to say that breaking the Prime Directive, since there's actually a mechanism in place for captains to go defend their Prime Directive decisions. We didn't always see them in action, but that's been mentioned. You have to be able to defend. As time went by the time we got to the Voyager years or whatever, people saying that. So I'm not counting that as a broken rule. I'm counting that as a very, I'm talking about in personal ways. So I'm really thinking more about when I agreed to this topic today, I was
Hmm.
thinking more in interpersonal terms, not galaxy spanning ways.
Yeah. So, Larry, are you
Although
thinking?
sometimes they could have galactic repercussions, but initially they start off as small personal, the way we saw happening in the Lord X episode.
So, are you talking about personal rules and personal morals and your own code of conduct and ethics?
Yeah, and I mean I mean existing rules, but what I mean is in small situations where
In
it's
small
mainly
situation. Yeah.
yeah, interpersonal rules and rule breaking.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and when is, and there's also a corollary here to everything is like you have to know what the rules are in order to break them when you need to.
Yeah,
Which
and this and
that's
we should
true in
say,
creativity, but also, interpersonally as well.
yeah, and we're gonna dive through the Star Trek examples in a moment. This show's always about tying it into the now too,
Mhm.
and
This show meaning our show.
yeah, 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 and also Star Trek. I get Star Trek's about
If
social
they're on the
commentary as
ball,
well.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that we were discussing is how does this relate to now? And there's some obvious things about the justice system in the United States. Is it fair? Are rules applied to everyone fairly, or are there differences depending on your appearance, your skin color, your race, or if you're a police officer or not? Are the rules equally applied to the police? These are big discussions and debates happening in America. But there's also been a lot of other discussion about rules related to governments around the world. How much right do governments have to require shelter in place, to shut down governments,
Hmm.
to not to shut down governments, I mean to shut down economies? What are the rules in place related to public safety and wearing a face mask, to requiring vaccinations? A lot of these things are both big picture social things that have galactic consequences, as you said, Larry, and they're also very personal things as well. I've been struggling with the ideas of how much do I open up our pod here? Would I be comfortable to have outdoor dining as it's been opened in Northern California? Would I be comfortable having that with a close friend of mine at the same table, at two tables away? Like, at what point do I feel like this is comfortable with my own rules? So I think the rules for many of us have felt like they're very much changing, if not challenged, this year. And this is kind of why we thought this could be a good topic for us to explore, because we're all struggling with, well, what's the rules here? How do I even approach this?
Well, and
And
I'm if at the sake of not violating the definition for today that I set down, yeah, a lot of what you're talking about involve laws or
mhm.
authorities, but I'm talking more even when it's a law and you're deciding whether or not to break it or not or bend it, it's still back down. I mean, if I decide to go out right now without my mask on, it's not going to bring down the whole country. Well, I hope it doesn't. Yay or nay. It's really most things stay on a very interpersonal level, and they don't. If one of the captains breaks a prime directive and does something to a planet, and 20 or 30 years later, as was said in this episode, no one goes back to check on them, and something,
Yeah.
all hell breaks loose. Oh, I don't know. You find a Superman out of history, and you decide you're going to do your own shipboard justice system, which is under protocol, under regulations, and your punishment is you stick him on a planet, and then 20 years go by, and that guy, upsets, causes galactic ripples from here to the Klingon Empire. Um, that's not quite, that's gotten out of hand, and yes, but if you're James T. Kirk running around, almost everything personal you do seems like it's going to become of galactic consequences.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, even though some of the things you're talking about involve legal regulations, legal strictures of a big body, of a big area, I'm still talking about individually, the individual repercussions in small scale.
So let's dive into that.
You
Where should we start that discussion? What episode?
Oh,
What
right here.
story?
Oh, well, this one. So and I thought later on the stricture was galactic, but the first thing I thought of, and people have been saying some here on, I'm defining this, so yes, I had a head start on it. But I go back to, and it happened, yes, it happened in the original series, and it even happened in this way once before, but it's more cinematic
Hmm.
in The Search for Spock. Kirk's
Yeah.
told, Kirk is told not to go to Genesis, but as he says, therefore I'm going anyway. And it wasn't, yes, Genesis it's been quarantined. It's off limits, but this is a personal thing to him. It's personal, he's going to do this for Spock, but it's a very small personal thing. And no one knows it's going to turn into a Klingon encounter and, turn in and then wind up back in the Federation Council room in 2 more years in a movie. But in the moment, it's all about him. The stakes are his. If he gets caught, he's in trouble. Then he's bounced out of the service, and he's the one and he's saying, guys, don't come along with me. This is my deal. Oh no, Captain, we're with you. But that's the kind of a case where I'm talking about here. He took an individual choice to it, but he felt like it was a rule. And a lot of people think rules don't apply to them, but this was a one particular case with a particular set of circumstances, and somebody made a decision. I mean, people who blindly just run around bull in a china closet or bull in a china shop, as I've heard, who just don't even know they're not self-aware. They're just, running around causing chaos. That's not what we're talking about. But this is a case where, in this case, Kirk had a decision to make, had a very specific situation, and for those reasons did what he did. And, you could say Amok Time is the same thing. He was ordered to go to this event, but he thought he had to go save Spock's life, and he broke orders in this case to go do it. He bent the rules, broke his orders. And, yes, everything wound up coming out hunky-dory. But in the moment, he was hell-bent to break the rules, break his orders, and go do what he thought was best.
Yeah.
So that's what
Yeah, I think that's a really great example, and it's also, I think, one of the most underrated odd number movies in the franchise. I think Search for Spock is really a wonderful film, and it's just so expands the cinematic scope of Star Trek from Wrath of Khan. I think what happens with Kirk gets to his sacred values. So we do things differently when we think something is sacred, and we've talked a little bit before. I don't remember what episode. It's been half a year, Larry. I don't remember what episodes.
You're welcome. You suddenly have an excuse. Okay.
I have an excuse. Thank you for that. I forget when we spoke about it last, but when you find something to be sacred, it's non-negotiable. You don't think as logically about it. So in the United States, we often think of freedom of speech as being sacred. There's lots of things, and there's a lot of individual differences. And I think for most Starfleet officers, rules from Starfleet are considered to be very sacred, and the hierarchy and all of these kind of things, it's quite important. At the same time, Kirk really, really values his friendships. He really values, especially Spock and Bones, especially everyone he's served with. And so I think what you see in not Wrath of Khan, in Search for Spock, is a little bit of conflict between his duty to Starfleet and his duty to his friends. And we see Bones is also afflicted as well. He's struggling in some ways. So this idea that maybe I can help the two of them, these two people I'm so close to, the sacred beliefs he has about helping his friends win out over that. And you're right, Larry. I think the consequences are really his to bear. He doesn't think it's going to have a galactic consequence, although it very much does.
Well, and part of this is also, not so much Amok Time, but that looked more life and death, and maybe there was life and death going on here, or death and death. But by the time of Search for Spock, he's been around the quadrant a time or two. It's like,
Yes.
oh my God, it's like you're starched. That's why Mariner and Lower Decks is kind of interesting, and I think we're gradually peeling away the onion. I've seen some hints, and again, I want to ask Mike McMahon if how canon his book from 6 7 years ago.
Oh, sure.
This is the book that started it all because he did this
Yeah.
out. He sold this out of that parody Twitter account. But
Yeah, and the
Becky
book is based
Mariner
on his
is in
tweets.
this.
Yeah,
She was a
Mariner's in there?
cadet. Mariner is in here. She's mentioned as, and there's lots of gibberish. This was like a parody book, but
Yeah, yeah.
Beckett Mariner is a character as a cadet here, and if this is canon in the eighth season, so she's like in her early mid 30s actually, which is kind of hidden, which totally leads into why she's so blasé about so much and why she's seen so much, and as we saw in this last episode, why she seems to know half the crew of the Enterprise E intimately, but well, not intimately maybe, but she knows them well. But whether it is or not, it seems that Mariner's been around the block in her own scale of things, and maybe has a lot less of that green, wet behind the ears cadet, young ensign that the rest of the lower deckers, if they're conscious of that, seem to have. Like Boimler,
Yeah.
who's so conscious about I got to stay on the career ladder, or I'm screwing up. And Tendi and
Yeah.
Rutherford are just so wonderfully out there and naively joyous in their own ways. They're not really, you don't get the sense that they're so conscious, and they're sciencey and opsy, but you don't get the sense that they're so conscious about climbing the ladder, and not ruffling
Yeah.
feathers. So that's one thing I think, and I was there too, but as the shows have unraveled, I can see, and I said this somewhere else on Tuesdays Live or in a column or something for the magazine, that same thing with Picard. We see our first characters in a new time setting, and
Now,
we
are
we
you talking Star
extrapolate.
Trek Picard, or are we talking
Yes,
the Next Generation?
the series Picard.
Yes. Yeah.
I think a lot of us, when we see a new series, our minds are like we're trying to fill in the gaps of time and place, and if it's a new era and all, and new faces, and we wildly we have one person, two people. We take Admiral Clancy and wildly extrapolate that she's representing all of Starfleet. Well, she's obviously she's CNC, so she's representing Starfleet. But it's like individual peccadillos, individual relationships. We don't. Some part of us we don't know, but we are so quick to just broad brush everything. And I know the first scene of Lower Decks. I'm like, oh my God, she's like
Yeah.
Mariner's a madhouse. Well, you figure out kind of quick she's drunk, and you went, she's drunk, but she's like a little loose cannon who not only does that on purpose. The reason she gets away with it, we figure out eventually why. But if you look at all those boring people in the background, they're all just trudging along like all the best Starfleeters we've ever seen in any other incarnation. She's an outlier. But again, we're watching a new show, learning new things, and the tendency was people were like, "Oh my God, they're all crazy at this time. They're all just a bunch of smartasses," Just like you like, "Oh my God, the Federation is so dark during Picard's time." Well, giant bodies kind of sway back and forth and don't usually veer off suddenly, but we're seeing Commander O, and we're seeing Admiral Clancy, and we're seeing one-off people who have leadership and who have sway. But the entire Federation, top to bottom, I don't think is that fundamentally different than the rest of the time. So that when things alter and change, and Clancy goes, "Oh, okay, fine, I'll send a squadron." Spoilers, guys. Um, it's not like she had this. Oh, I was all evil over here, and now I'm all good. That's not what's going on. So, in Lower Decks here, it's a little heightened, but I think people have understood that Mariner was a one-off, a really one-off character, right? And that we see
Yeah.
plenty of good old traditional, stodgy, rule-obeying Starfleeters, young and old, behind her, for what it's worth.
Yeah. I'm kind
Did
of.
I?
I'm trying to figure out where to go from
Sorry.
there. No, we went
I handed you 26
Picard.
weeks a minute ago, so come on.
I'm gonna have to say I concur with all of that.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, this is tricky because we I'm thinking of episodes like The First Duty, you mentioned Picard, and my go-to when I think about Picard, it's not Prime Directive, and I think the problem with the Prime Directive is we can get caught in a large hurricane of Prime Directive debate, and it'll just wreck a lot
Just
of
like they do.
just like, yeah, in the episodes, yeah, no, totally. But for me, First Duty is always the prime example of rules, because we see something that is so sacred and non-negotiable to Picard is the truth. And he says that in that very great monologue. The first duty of every Starfleet officer is to the truth. That is your guiding light, your North Star. That is the sacred thing. You can never break that, because once you break that, you are no longer one of us. Which I think really helps us to understand things like Star Trek Insurrection. Mm-hmm. It's not that we get Admiral Doherty out. Doherty says,
out.
But he says to Picard, the Prime Directive doesn't apply. These people have warp technology. They've let go of that. But what so angers Picard is the lying and the manipulation for Starfleet to get this technological advantage of metaphysics and everything that's going to do. They're lying. Doherty's lying. So what we see in the First Duty is it's not that Starfleet has these rules set up that you need to tell the truth. I'm sure that's somewhere in the cadet handbook. But this is
telling the truth. Yes.
Telling the truth, yeah.
To make up for all the parents who didn't raise their kids to do that.
Right, yeah, right. But the culture and everything that Picard and Starfleet have been raised with, and the culture around Starfleet, is one that has really supported this idea of the truth. That this is a sacred thing, that this is something that you don't cross. And that's the thing with rules, is when rules really align up with your moral code, you don't need there to be a specific rule. You find ways to make it work because it matches with your moral code. But when the rules are out there and they don't really make a lot of sense, or they're hard to follow, like we had a great comment here from let me see if I could back it up, Phil. So Phil said, people I've dealt with lately about COVID are all or nothing. I've been ridiculed for things like wearing a mask. If I'm also not hosing down all my groceries before bringing them in the house, their opinion is if you aren't going to follow every rule to the letter, then you're hypocritical for following any of them. So they don't follow any. And I think this is a situation where it's very hard to follow the rules or to know what the rules are, because we all value safety. We all value taking care of ourselves and other people. None of us really want to get someone else sick. We don't want to get sick ourselves. But knowing what's the right thing to do and how that maps onto some kind of moral code that we all have, that's very vague because we're in new territory. Most of us have never lived through a global pandemic before. So that's where I think the First Duty is so wonderful, because it maps onto something that is already inside of Picard. And a lot of the stuff we're struggling with, it's unclear as to what it's mapping onto and how to be safe.
Well, I'm part of this whole thing about the rules today, and well, this changed, and first they said don't worry about masks, and then they said they did. There's two things going on, and the second one, which is happening more and more and more as we've gone along, is people manipulating the whatever that is for their own good, or trying to gin something out of something. But at the core, yes, things have changed, because I'm sorry, guys, we're boldly or not so boldly going where no one's gone before. I mean, yes, we've had pandemics and all that, but these are all new cases. And I'm sorry that we didn't know what the rules were. We didn't know what the science, the data, what the best practices are. This is not the flu. This is not name 47 million different diseases that there's a known treatment for. when you're dealing with something new, that's the whole point. If it was an old established thing we knew, it wouldn't be a pandemic.
Yeah.
If something was different, like, oh, suddenly we have a vaccine for something, and suddenly a fourth of the world is not doing that vaccine, and there's an outbreak of polio or smallpox, well, okay, that's a whole different thing. But it's not like you didn't know what you should have been doing
Yeah.
as the way you've been doing it for decades. So this is a case, though, where they're madly experimenting, and a lot of expectations, even in the first few months, like, what's the residual effects? What is your reinfection chance? How do all these factors that are individualized among all of us, how do all these individual factors play about getting it, about recovering, and about residual effects and all this, the clotting,
Yes.
and the damage to organs that they're talking about. Oh, well, I'm cured and over it, but now I'm going to have, lung medication or something I'm going to take something for the rest of my life now because of it. And yay, I
Yeah.
didn't die, but I still have this residual effect. Well, what's the best practice for minimizing that? Or, oh, look, the kids aren't being effective. Well, it's turning out that a lot of them are. We just weren't looking in but it's because it's new. So
Yeah.
yes, rules can be changed, evolving, in flux, not because of some nefarious conspiracy or political manipulation, but because that's the way science is. Is
Yeah.
it Big Bang
And
or steady state? Is it did the Brontosaurus do this, or did the Brontosaurus even, I mean, we're always doing that. So,
and there's a huge mental
and,
health
and
angle
some
to
people
this.
have an idea, people that have been spoiled by modern civilization. I say spoiled. I don't know that a lot of people, that's such a new thing that people have, they don't stop to think about that. And they're just, well, they told us this last month and now they're telling us this. And, there's anywhere from suspicion to just confusion. But that's part of what's been, that's the whole point. If this was a common thing, we wouldn't all be struggling with it.
Yeah,
Everybody.
so Sean has a great reminder of this is World Mental Health Day,
Oh,
and I think this is what we're talking about right now, Larry. This is the mental health crisis of the year. For a number of reasons. Number one is we're getting to know now more that COVID-19 has very long-term mental health repercussions. We know that it has a huge impact on most people who recover. Many of them continue to experience breathing problems. They have difficulty falling asleep. Some are really they're vulnerable for trauma-like symptoms. I fear for long-term stigma of folks who have had this. There's fears of, did I transmit this to other people? Did I get other people infected? So we know COVID-19, and there's long-term attention and memory problems that some people experience. And we'll know much more about that in the years to come. What are the long-term impacts of COVID-19? But this thing that we're talking about right now, rules, how to follow them, this has a huge mental health impact. A lot of times when you have rules, when the culture has agreed upon standards of how to act in certain situations, that relieves a lot of stress. Larry, you and I, we can drive to each other's home. Now, that's probably a 6-7 hour drive for us going up and down
right.
California. But the same rules that apply in Southern California to driving apply in Northern California to driving. Not only does that reduce stress, because we know what to expect, but it also enhances safety, because we're all following the same rules. This is the same problem here with COVID-19. As the rules have been changing, as the rules are differentially applied in different parts of our country and other countries,
Right.
it creates massive stress. You don't know what to expect. You don't know what's the right thing to do. You don't know if you're staying safe. And when it comes to mental health, one of the first things I often talk about is getting enough sleep. In fact, there's a new episode of the Psych Show that just came out yesterday. It's about
Why,
all of
that's
my
your
favorite.
YouTube show, isn't it, Dr. Rob?
It's been a while. We haven't had a new episode since May, but there's a new one out. And it's all about coping. And the first thing I talk about there is sleep, food, hydration, and staying healthy. Taking medications that you need to do, protecting yourself, wearing a face mask. That is, there's all of those things make every other aspect of your mental health better. They help you to cope easier. You're more rejuvenated. You're more resilient. But if your health is compromised, your mental health is compromised. And right now, knowing what rules to follow is a highly stressful process that can impact people's health. So there's a very strong connection here. I would say this is COVID-19 and how to navigate it. This is the mental health story of the year.
Well, yes, in so many different ways. And here's the thing. It's what's affecting this. It's much easier when we're all on the same page and everyone's just with it. That's great. And regional differences play out. Regional attitudes play out. Urban versus rural. The interior of the country versus the coasts where people tend to mix more. But even then, even within those groups, there's subgroups. And just in some small town in the heartland, maybe you've got people following rules and others who don't. And it's tougher when it's big and anonymous, like in a city, in an urban setting. That's bad enough. You're just driving by and you see somebody crossing the street without a mask and you kind of go, ah. But when it's like a small town, when there's 1,000 people in town and half of them are flaunting or whatever the attitude is. And then now the stress is on you. You've not only got the COVID stress, you've got the social stress of being, an outcast, or, you've got the internal battle of, do I do what I think is right, or do I have to go with what the flow is around me, even though I think I'm in a pocket? Because some people, whether they're physically traveling, like somebody who lives in Des Moines, but they're in and out of LA and New York and Houston all the time, they're much more conscious of things, or in Bug Tussle. They're much more conscious of that than they are if they're their next door neighbor who goes down to the local grocery store and back, and that's their world, even when it's not a pandemic,
Yeah.
And that it introduces that stress and that tension of how much, which is what happens all the time anyway. The more we mix, and whether it's big scale travel or whether it's like literal travel. Do I watch the news? Do I think about follow what's happening in the rest of the world, much less on the other end of my state, versus someone who just sits in their own world? They've got 5 or 10 family members and friends, and that's their world, and everything else kind of filters in. What's their awareness? What's their parameters? And whether it's physical or literal, that causes stress too.
There's Rose brings up a really great comment. Rose, I think, has been one of our longest members of the community here, going back to some of our original episodes. And Rose says, what about when people don't follow rules and make it worse for everyone else? If someone comes up to you, then they're breaking the rules, right? So do we have a Star Trek parallel here? And this brings up the public health aspect of a lot of what we're discussing here, Larry. About not only keeping yourself safe, but what happens when your decisions have an impact on the well-being of others. And we're bringing up California. Well, I'm bringing up California. California was one of the first states to ban indoor smoking in public places. And the reason for that was the science was pretty clear that secondhand smoke from other people smoking, it had an impact on other people around you, and it was almost as bad as smoking yourself. And there was research that secondhand smoke would get into furniture and would have long-term impacts on people who are sitting there and using that furniture. So California banned it, and over the course of the last couple of decades, or last 3 decades, that has expanded to most states in this country. But that was an example of your decisions will have an impact on someone else. And in most of the country, you can still smoke outside, except around hospitals and things like that. But the rules were changed because of the public health. So do we have a Star Trek parallel to a story where your actions, rules are created because your actions or your inaction might have a big impact on the well-being of other people?
Oh, I may have to defer on. I'm a little brain dead. Well, I'm thinking part of what's going on here, like I said, part of this is when things are in flux, when things are evolving. and maybe they are evolving faster than we even realize. Um,
I think Sahir had an example.
yeah, there.
A Deep Space Nine example was a Babel, where there was a outbreak and
There was an
Cisco
aphasia.
had
Yes.
yeah, and Cisco issued a quarantine, which wasn't necessarily the popular decision, but was the right decision to get that under control. I mean that example's a little on the nose here, but I think that is one example that comes to mind. I don't know if our chat has. Jared says blink of an eye from Voyager. Oh, that's really interesting. So this is the episode where Voyager is, for a very brief moment of time, yes, is.
Well, define time.
I know Larry. It's all relative.
Yeah.
Time. It's a relative concept.
Just in time, I found us just in time. Oh, wait, okay, no.
I'll go to warp through space and time. The episode of
Give me warp to the factor of 5, 6, 7, 8.
7, 8.
I just lost that. Sorry,
that was
spoiler.
That was a great moment. Well, just don't say who says it.
I won't.
So what's great about Blink of an Eye is it was a complete accident. Voyager had no intention of setting up shop on top of a planet and impacting their culture for thousands of years. That was never the intention. They thought they were just going about their own way. However, it drastically changed that in the course of that entire civilization. So at best, their ignorance, at worst, their complete negligence had a tremendous impact on that society. And our real world first contacts are full of examples of this. Now, a lot of times, our real world first contacts, like Christopher Columbus, were very much racist, xenophobic. Those individuals didn't think very highly of the people they were meeting. But there was a lot of unintended consequences when it came to disease, and bringing over diseases that people had absolutely no immunity to, and then wiped out entire populations.
Especially when you didn't have a scientific basis to even know how disease transmission and curative worked.
Yes,
that was underlying a lot of that. But you have the political, cultural, racial attitude. On top of all the scientific unintended consequences. I'm just caught up in our chat here. I feel like we keep throwing things out and then we don't answer them.
Well, maybe we should go to a couple episodes that you and I outlined, and then we can kind of circle back here. This is one that we outlined. Who watches The Watchers? This is a fantastic episode of The Next Generation, and it brings up a lot of different themes here that we're talking about.
And yes, I know that that moment we saw there. The whole episode is undergirded by a prime directive concern, which goes against what I just said. I'm breaking my own rule, but to me, this is a case where this planet is obvious, and maybe 100 years from that, and maybe that's the point of the prime directive. Maybe not now, but in 100 years or 1,000 years, what are the repercussions? But the butterfly effect. But in this moment, it felt very personal, partly because the Federation's good intentions of observing, anthropologically observing this culture, that they were betrayed by the tech. They had a glitch. They're blind. They're bird blind.
They're bird blind.
Their duck blind failed, which foiled their own trying to adhere to their own rules of non-interference. And so here's Picard. It's one of those cases where our best intention, something happened that wasn't our fault, and now we're just, what's the best way to fix it? Do we just back out and do we try to wipe our tracks a little bit and not show, or what? And this is a case where it's Picard in the moment is having to decide, even as they try to clean up the mess, the unintended mess they didn't intend, things start to spiral out of control. And Picard says, I have to do my own. I have to take my training in leadership and my captain's pips and decide what to do. I'm going to show one of them the reality, because the damage that we've done is going to be worse than the damage of me revealing what normally I would never do.
Right. It's one of those situations where there are no clear rules, because what you had set up has already failed, and you're in uncharted territory, which in some ways many of us have experienced this year.
Yes.
When it comes to, I don't know if anyone here is a parent of a school-aged child, like a K through 12. Larry, there's no
I'm
rules.
so glad I'm not a parent right now. Well, you've got a 2-year-old. You're at least Does she have daycare? Did she normally have daycare?
Yes, and the rules for that are very different. I have a lot of compassion for parents right now of school-aged children. My daughter is not K through 12 age, but there's no clear rules on how you handle this. How do you?
Well, like everything else, it's different region to region. It's different district to district. I have a lot of my nieces and my nieces are all teachers, and a lot of cousins and second cousins are a lot of teachers. And it's a patchwork, quilt. But here's the thing. Yep. So now where my older brother and his family all are, my 2 nieces, and they all teach in a town in Oklahoma, where totally apart from school, the Pop Warner style, junior football, the middle school football team were all observing the COVID, and they were debating whether to even play games. And they came down of, we're going to follow all the strictures and all the other teams. It's like small towns. And you had one dad who went to a family thing, where the family didn't care about anything, came back, infected his kid. They were waiting. It's a little bit like, we see in national headlines where they were getting tested, but he didn't tell anybody he was getting tested.
So
and then it comes back positive. Well, now they've quarantined the whole team. The parents of the other kids are all pissed because they were doing the right thing. And It was this domino effect. Plus, the kids were in school during the day, And so now there's this whole ripple effect because of one person. It's a perfect illustration of why pandemic, why the thinking underlies the thinking that it does, and why on paper, the standard, here's the basic thinking behind why we're doing this. It's not some crazed attempt to take over society. It's like, well, duh, here's what happens. But that was a small town, and that was, all these things are large models, small models, but viral, we say, it went viral on online as just a word we use. It's like, well, there's a reason why going viral means going viral.
I haven't thought about that until now that you mention it. I haven't thought about that all year long. We've always so many people want to go viral, and the reason for that is a very quick spread of whatever you've worked on. It's out there, and we have that term for a reason, and we're seeing that this year. That's really
I've wondered actually if we'll come up with a new term besides going viral after the pandemic. I wonder if there'll be some new PC term rather than go viral.
Yeah, it's interesting. But that's kind of the case in point, Larry. Yeah, so with schools, the rules of attendance and all of this, and participation and all of that, they no longer work. So what are the new rules? No one really knows. We're kind of figuring this out, and that's what has caused so much of the mental health crisis for parents and students and teachers. It's all of them. And I think teachers, a lot of parents are struggling. Some of them were taking it out on teachers. A lot of teachers are parents themselves. Like, they don't like this situation either. There's no clear path forward.
And they're taking it out on administrators?
Yes.
They're taking it out on local and state education people, or governors or presidents. I mean, it's like yes, the stress is, and this is the education realm. We kind of touched on the whole business side, which is the whole, everything is economic as well as scientific medical, right?
Yeah.
Businesses um, taxing businesses shut down. Now you've got taxes. Now you've got stress on government services, which are trying to help people in the first place. And what's the best way to address that? And
Libby has a great comment
it's
here.
domino.
There's been cases near me where parents are sending kids with fevers to school. One reason I'm petrified of going back to the office is there's a long history of people insisting on working sick even with the flu. So Libby, I think, is really speaking to two major problems that we have in the United States. One is we don't have good quality, affordable childcare available to everyone. So in a lot of places, it's if your child can't go to school, you now have to not go to work to take care of your child. So as we've seen with this pandemic, as people have lost work and lost school, there haven't been any good options of how do you help your kids, because the other big thing we have in America is to kind of work hard, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and even if you're sick, you still go to work. I desperately hope, Larry, that changes as a result of the pandemic. The
Among
pressure to
several
work, among
social
several
things.
things, yeah. The pressure to work, even if you're sick, is such a gosh, I hate to be so on the
Insanity.
nose. I was gonna say a disease. It's such a disease in the United States. It's Libby. I understand where you're coming from. I felt in my last job, I felt a lot of pressure to show up for work, even if I was sick, because if I didn't, I got a lot of pushback. So uh, it's hard. It's hard, Larry.
I'm so far behind
Perhaps
in the chat. I don't. Two things. I'm so far behind in the
yes.
chat that I just wonder if maybe do we have more examples to cite? Here's what happened to me last night while we're in the briefing room, and maybe we should think about exiting the briefing room. But
Sure.
I got through my like the oldest examples, and then by the time I got to, you want to put up the DS9 example I came up with?
Oh, your DS9 example cracked me up. Here's your DS9 example.
All of them. I was just, and we've got some specifics here. Who was it here? Victoria on Facebook pointed out, and this is how far back I am, 20 minutes in, that Damar broke the rules of Cardassia, who loves status quo, and he rebelled, which is very odd for Cardassians socially. And then, of course, he paid for it and his prior sins. But anyway, I'm so far behind on the chat. But yeah, DS9 was like, oh, it's the darker, grittier. So it's like somebody was breaking a rule. And then it
Yeah.
had 40 or 50 recurring characters that all loved to break rules too. So anyway,
So,
and Voyager, you had Maquis who were breaking a rule by rebelling. And I know that we're talking about big scale laws and regulations there, but you had that mindset where for the first year or so you wondered if Tom Paris was just going to be that kind of angsty, or whatever. But like various Maquis people. But then the drama sometimes comes out of do the by the book Starfleet people. Does Tuvok break a rule? When they're faced with losing their lives and being stranded so far from home, part of the initial dramatic arc of Voyager was whether they're Maquis or they're Starfleet, are they going to settle? The first year was all about, are they going to go along with Janeway, who's kind of like a state health officer trying to do what she thinks is right, and all the natives are restless down below her about whether she's in this special situation. So anyway, going through all in Enterprise, you can think, well, Archer breaking the
there were
airlock
a lot of rules
yeah,
were not established, and a part of
exactly,
Enterprise was figuring that out. And then coming
figuring
out
out
on the
the
other
rules.
end, as we go farther along, yeah, you're right, Larry. As we go farther along to the Kelvin timeline, Picard, Discovery,
Right.
rules are kind of much more nebulous. So I got to stop for a moment, Larry. So we don't often do this, but when there is disinformation going on in the comments, I feel like we have to step in here. So, folks, I'm just going to take a moment and say masks are one of the most effective ways of staying safe out there. And if you hear otherwise, that is disinformation. And that is information with the intent of deceiving. What masks do, and the reason why surgeons wear them in the operating room, the reason why your dentists wears it when they are right up in your face is it reduces the aerosols that are coming out of your mouth. It reduces it's a barrier that blocks the potential contagions of getting to you. The best example of this, I saw this great image
And not
about
just you to them, but them to you back.
yeah, and so there's some recent evidence that it might actually also reduce how much viral load you are taking on. So it actually makes a difference how much of a virus you get exposed to. A small amount of exposure does lead to a smaller infection. A larger exposure leads to a larger infection. So there's some evidence that wearing a mask might also reduce the intensity of exposure you might have to COVID-19. So I really hate to do this, Larry, but we have to stop the disinformation. Wearing masks is one of the things in your control that is going to be the biggest thing we can do in addition to distancing ourselves from others and not engaging in certain activities and high-risk activities of stopping the spread of this virus.
And that wasn't invented for 2019 and 2020. That's like you said, surgeons do that in surgery.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you've got a high transmission danger of viral things. It's also, sadly, historically, one of the things that drives me up the wall is when it looks like we learn nothing. It was a debate, and they're living examples from the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918, 1919. They had this same kind of debate then, on a lot of different ways. The other thing one of the things that was a result of that pandemic was it used to be a thing. People, men especially, chewed tobacco and spit a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the outcomes of the pandemic then was, the old Western saloons with the spittoons, and you'd see, ding. And one of the things that happened was all the health departments said no more public spitting, which today we're like, what? But that was a thing. And that all dried up overnight as you got into the 20s. It wasn't just that, that was a saloon thing from the Wild West. That's when that ended, because that was a transmission-y type thing that was easily cleared up. But yeah, the whole mask wearing debate was apparently going on then. But people, there was a segment the same thing. Don't tell me what to do. But I just go back to, we don't let people drive drunk. It's not just about the person driving; it's the people on the street. We don't just, no shirt, no shoes, no service.
And the reason why this is so important with COVID-19, Larry, is folks can be infected with COVID-19 and not showing symptoms and be breathing out all the aerosols that carry this virus. So that is why wearing a mask is so important outside. Larry, there's been times where, so my work has been in providing therapy, which is usually a distant process. But there have been times where I've done rotations and I might be working with someone who's in an ICU. And I'm working with people who I'm providing therapy to people who are in a very vulnerable health state, or there's people around who are in a very vulnerable health state. And I am not allowed into those situations without wearing a mask and without the personal protective equipment, because I might introduce something there that people who have vulnerable immune systems could really be hurt by. So it's always been the standard of care when you are working with someone who's highly vulnerable, or if you might be infected with something. And in a global pandemic, it's one of the best things we have. Forget a global pandemic, but if you're sick, it's one of the best things you can do to keep other people safe. And folks, we're just not going to allow any disinformation about that. So if anyone continues to state otherwise, we might have to take actions against that, because that is disinformation. It's not true. It is completely false. You can look at any scientific consensus with any government disease agency. Wearing masks are the number one way to reduce.
Or a non-government health agency.
Yeah. So sorry, folks. We're not gonna allow any discussion of that. Otherwise, that's disinformation. Larry, so should we
What I'm
go to
trying
the
to say a
count?
minute ago was that
Yeah.
I'm just blur. I mean, people are going to come up with a lot of, and we should maybe highlight those when we get to hailing frequencies. But it's just like the more the series evolved, the more individual rule breaking for a greater. I mean, we say rule breaking, but this mindset of that seemed to happen, and a lot of it was, personally, ethically, morally, karmically, the right thing to do. But it just seemed like more and more frequently that became a plot point that was used as drama. So anyway,
Yeah.
people keep it citing your specific examples. I just am saying we could just go on all day citing
Yeah,
examples.
we could go on all day, and so
It's
maybe
more
we
about
should.
the why of it, not the what.
Let's jump into the counselor's log here.
Please.
So Larry, there was a lot of different angles I was thinking about where to go here with the counselor's log, um, and there's a lot of places that we could go. I talked a little bit about sacred values a little bit earlier here, but I think one angle I want to take this to is following the rules and when it seems to be appropriate to follow the rules or not. And there a lot of research has been done about cheating, and when do people follow the rules here
Mm.
about cheating versus not cheating, and that brings up the first duty again, and those kind of situations. So it turns out it's actually quite difficult to have people follow the rules, and there's a few things that you can make that makes it even more difficult. So if a situation feels like very competitive and that anything you do might give you a little bit of a competitive edge, or if there doesn't seem to be any real purpose behind the rules, if there doesn't seem to be any value behind the rules, those are two situations where cheating can really flourish. And if the rules also aren't enforced evenly, consistently, that can really enhance a
Right.
lot of cheating. And the
Which
reason I bring
which
that up,
introduces
yes,
unfairness. Yes.
yes, which introduces unfairness. And the reason I bring that up is I think one of the things we're all seeing here is enforcement based upon where you live and where you've been and what part of the world you're in, related to all the changing rules of 2020, has been quite up in the air. There's been where I live, how many signs you have of the different rules that we have around 2020. There's a lot of diversity there. It's very hard to know how these things are being enforced. We have leaders all over the United States and probably all over the world who themselves are following these rules differently. So a lot of that, why I'm referencing the research around cheating, I think it has a lot to help us think through these problems. In most environments, to reduce cheating, you want to make it as less competitive as possible. Integrity and a spirit of learning and supporting each other is needed. Those are the sacred values I was talking about before. And you need very vigilant rule enforcing. So
Hmm.
it can't feel like if I don't follow the rules, I'm at some kind of advantage. It needs to feel like the rules are there for sensible reason and they map onto some type of moral compass we already have. And then breaking of those rules needs to be vigilantly followed with equity. Everyone should be treated with equity here. That there's justice in how these rules are being enforced. I think those last pieces, maybe the last two pieces, are what has been missing a lot right now. Is rules haven't been enforced with equity. They haven't been enforced vigilantly, and things like wearing a mask, for example, it should be tied to the moral compass of caring for yourself and your neighbor in the same way as we had with smoking, or as with wearing a seatbelt or following the speed limit. Don't mess with Texas is a saying we have in Texas, but also has expanded around the country. Don't mess with Texas came from a public initiative to reduce
Ad campaign.
littering,
Yes. Yeah.
an ad campaign
PSAs.
to reduce littering. Why it was so brilliant is it was a public concern that
Type.
mapped onto the moral code exactly of Texans. That's what's been missing here, Larry, is the rules of how we should care for ourselves and others haven't necessarily been mapped onto our moral code, and they haven't been enforced with equity. And so that's why I think we're struggling so much with these different things. That's why there's been so much stress here, and so much division, and so much conflict, which we've actually experienced here today on Life Support Live in our community here. So with that, I'm gonna just stop for a moment, so because I think we all could use a little K3 break, Larry. Let's jump into the K3 factor. Larry, I'm dying to know what have you got for us today?
Like yeah, I bet you were like puzzling. Well, I'm gonna, again, I was a little frazzled last night, and I was trying to think of the behind the scenes. K3, for those of you who are new to Life Support Live, is a chance for me to indulge my end of things, which is deep diving Star Trek, the way we do through all things Trekland, especially in Portal 47. And this time, deep diving our theme back into the background of Star Trek, the creatives, the behind the scenes. I went personal when we talked about breaking the rules. So let me take you back to, let me show, can you put up that first one?
You gotta give me a hint. What's the first one? Oh, okay. Yeah. I want to make sure I don't do them out of order.
Yeah. So this is me. This is my second year working on the Next Generation Companion. This is actually, I'm sitting in Renee Echeverria's little office reading 6th season Yellow scripts from the end of the year there. That's what's actually going on, to get caught up so I can interview people about the last 3 or 4 episodes that hadn't aired yet when I'm there. That alone, that was my second research trip to LA. The first time I went, I was on a 3-month deadline to get the old blue edition of the companion out. Starting from scratch, and where the topic today comes in was starting off following the rules. Again, I'm a little guy from Oklahoma who doesn't want to make somebody mad in Big Bad Paramount and Big Bad Star Trek, and all these hoops and things to jump through. And what I had to learn that I didn't know at first, but I learned, were all these hoops and how they intersected and how they what the pecking order was. I'm an author. I'm an official author. I thought, well, that's a big, that's a carte blanche there. I'm an author official for a licensee who I wasn't making action figures. I needed information. So technically I should have dealt with the media people for Star Trek to do interviews. And at that time, Paramount did not have an on-lot publicist for media relations. They contracted with an agency, Bender Goldman Helper back then. So it's like and then that was all for a licensee, which was Pocketbook, Simon & Schuster, who was a licensee of greater, the Star Trek operation at Paramount TV. What I didn't get was, when I would write here's a list of who all and I'm coming out on my own dime, out of who knows how much this is going to be, but I need to do it. And it's exciting. I'm all excited. But as I quickly learned, the reality was, so I'm sending my question, who I want to talk to, which is like everybody, who I want to talk to in advance, not questions, but who I want to talk to, just the list of names. I'm sending that to Simon & Schuster, my editor, who then sends it to licensing, who then sends it over to media relations, who then has to deal with people actually in production. So that was like 4 hoops. And I'm thinking, well, this is the official book. Of course, people are going to open the gates and roll out the red carpet for the first official author to, with this hot show. 5 years in, we're talking like end of the 5th season. And I got crickets. So I have I can afford, I'm working a day job. I have a week set up. I've been to LA once, maybe twice, where I've driven. But I can't afford to drive and take 2-3 days. So I'm flying, renting a hotel room, I have 5 or 6 business days. Okay. So there are people who have retired. Bob Justman, bless his heart. I went over to his house. No big deal. Spent 4 or 5 hours with him. Had this huge interview with him from that time period. A couple of other people. But I had been writing back and forth with Mike Okuda, with Rick Sternbach, with Eric Stillwell, people that that were on the production who were low key people who were great sources and they got it. They also knew they were fans. They knew fandom. But when I was going through the official channels, frustration, frustration, frustration. So of my 5-6 days I had there, there's a building picture I gave you.
At first you sent me this, and I thought this was some type of life support
Mistake?
live retreat joke. No, I thought, did Jared send me this? Is this a life support live retreat? But here you go.
Here you go. So the first time I came to LA to work on Star Trek professionally, I stayed a week at the Best Western Golden Key in Glendale, which is no longer there. It's now, if you know LA and you know Glendale, this is one of the corners of where the Americana shopping complex is now. But anyway, it was there for a long time, because back in the days I had points with Best West. Anyway, but I sat there for a day, and I was waiting to hear back. 2 days went. Monday went by, Tuesday went by, Wednesday went by. I've got 5 days. I've got 3 months to write this book that I knew fandom was going to judge me on. If I did it halfway right, it would sit on people's shelves for 40 or 50 years, which is done. I didn't know then that it would all be, cannibalized and thrown into memory alpha. If I'm lucky, if they're even doing that, or citing it. I just remember like 3 days went by, and they'd gotten me Bob Justman's number, and I went over and did that. Fine. Yay, that was great. But I needed to talk to Rick Berman and Jerry Taylor and Mike Pillar and, writers, much less all the creative heads for this book that I was doing, that all I had done so far was pull things out of other interviews the last 5 years. But I couldn't write a book, citing everybody else. I had to do my own original stuff. And I was totally capable of doing that. I was just frustrated with the system. And I'll never forget, on Wednesday, I'm sitting in that motel room, with the person, my contact from not licensing in New York, not my editor, but there in LA, the person who wasn't even a Paramount employee at the time. They were a contracted vendor, an agency. I can't think of her name, but it was the person from, I've got the memo somewhere with her names on it. But we were on the phone, and I called and I said, look, I'm feeling vulnerable. It's like if I make a stink here, I'm little Larry Nemecek from Oklahoma. They can cut me off and I'm out of here. So if I make a stink too much, if I make a fuss. So I'm calling and going, look, I've got 5 days, and I've spent 3 of them to interview people for a book I've got to do in 2 months that the whole world is going to judge me, whether I'm a flake, or a flack, or whatever. I've got to do
your career sort of riding on it. Yeah.
Yes. And I said, look, I know several people on the lot, and this person who is dealing with, instead of like focusing on me, and you know what, there are better people in all positions. Sometimes our interactions in life and our interactions with institutions, like Picard walking in with the little schmuck at the front desk of Starfleet Academy and Picard. Sometimes our interactions with a whole institution are all about like our interaction with one person, and it colors us. But I'm on the phone with this person, and I said something about, look, I know people already. All I need is a pass to go on the lot and talk to people that I know already who trust me, much less other people who ought to go, you've picked him to be your official author. You ought to, what's the big deal? Was there a flaw? Do you regret who you've got doing the project? What's the big deal with hesitancy here? Well, part of it was they were I didn't know this for timing. I learned quickly, never did it again, but they were production was in the big build up to get out. They were in their senioritis run to get to the end of the year. They were like in the last month of shooting. All anybody cared about was getting out the door, getting into the break, right? They'd been there for 8 or 9 long months. Plus, production didn't have to answer to media relations, who didn't have to answer to licensing, who didn't have to answer to they kind of did. You know what I'm saying? I had all those things, but it's my thing here. And I will never forget how I said, look, I know people on the lot. Just do me a pass and I will go, And she was like, do not do that. This is on the phone, but I could see her. She's like, do not do that. I go, what do you mean do not do that? She goes, do not, under any circumstances, go on the lot on your own accord. Do not get on the lot on your own accord. And I'm like, what? I'm what I just have been saying. I'm this, and this. And she's like, if you go on the lot, will you be responsible for your actions? Will you be responsible for your actions? I'm doing this with the, I'm imagining that's what she was doing. And I'm like, of course I'll be no, I'm like an out of control maniac. It's like, of course I'm going to be responsible for, it's like, what? And she's like, I will not be responsible for what happens if you go on the lot without our authorization. And I'm like, what are you talking about? The whole thing, bottom line was, I did. And by the end of the week, I met, and I had even been on the lot as a visitor who went over to see Mike and Rick in the art department like 2 years before. That was what was insane. You think by being official, you're going to, it makes whatever you cobble together as just a tourist fan, it's going to be that times 1,000. It's like, no. But what I realized was it's more about the channels. But the end result was I learned all my lessons from this. I also learned that in the end run, it was much better for me to go meet people one by one than to have been escorted around like a visiting VIP or something. And I had to make my own way and meet my own people and earn a lot of my own trust. And I had help eventually. That year that you see me in Renee's office, Lolita Fajo had met me by then. She goes, oh, we need to get Larry a thing. And she was calling all the writers. Hey, you guys need to talk to Larry. He's doing the second edition of the book. It was like, it was thank you. This is what I thought. But the first year before the first edition came out, I basically had to, if not break a rule, I had to bend it. And I had to learn when to get assertive because the rules was, here is the procedure. Part of this could have been when to follow procedure and protocol the way Captain Freeman says. Right. And when not to. And that's why I love that ending scene where she says they're going to play good cop, bad cop, basically, which is a whole factor there. She's going to play good cop. She's going to play good Starfleet and let Mariner play bad Starfleet because sometimes you need your negative side, evil Kirk, with the scratches on the alternating, changing sides of your face. Sometimes you need that to get yourself through. So, yes, I had this insane phone call with that woman, young woman, and she's probably scared that some maniac moron hick from Oklahoma is going to come in and her name is the one on the letter. And if I do something wrong, then she's paranoid about, it's the government or the Hollywood, paranoia of cover your ass and don't get yelled at by your next superior. All I'm trying to do is get my thing done. But it was and that's a good lesson in if you can find the common ground if you've got a roadblock and try to figure out what's the common good and reassure. Anyway, I'll just never forget that. So I didn't break a rule, although I'm sure I did many times because I don't have a picture of me meeting Gene Roddenberry because I followed a rule and I didn't know how you bend the rule, how everybody does it. You do not have a camera on the in the pre-cell phone camera days. You don't have a camera on the lot means you don't walk around with it hanging off your neck like a stupid tourist. Yeah. You put your camera in your bag. When you get in the room you're going to, then you take your camera out. So that's why I don't have a picture of me meeting Gene Roddenberry, even in the pre-camera days. But this year was a time when I was so desperate to do the right thing for the greater good, which was my book and fandom and, yes, my reputation, but also what I could do for fandom. And I'd been given the responsibility versus some immutable objects in my temporary way and how to navigate that and go on. Anyway, that's Larry, what came up to my mind when we came up with this topic. So there's your... let me check. Can you put up the map?
Yes, I was going to ask you about the map.
So the map is...
Boom.
So here's Hollywood. So here's Paramount down here in the lower left, 5555 Melrose. I'm up here in Glendale at the Golden Key, over at the very top. So look at that. It's all of 6.7 miles. This was 15 minutes, overnight. So it would have been 20 minutes, whatever. I was 7 miles away from Paramount, sitting there festering in my motel room. I might as well have been at the South Pole for all the good it was, right? But that's how close and yet how far away. And sometimes, when you're looking at the big picture of things about whether to break or even bend a rule, the rules or the procedure, those are the kinds of things that were weighing on me. So there you go. That was
there's
so does that fit our discussion?
I think so. I think it does fit our discussion. I want to jump into the away mission here. I'm going to pivot a little bit. Libby, I'm going to talk to you just for a moment, and we're going to do a little real time away mission here. I think Libby is having a hard time today, and I just want to say, Libby, we're trying to figure this out as we go. And speaking of rules, when to follow and when to break, we want this to be a safe place for everyone. And Life Support Live has always been the idea of this has been for us to come together and to celebrate Star Trek together and to use it to learn how to figure out how to move forward. And it means a lot to us that when you say that this has been one of the highlights of your week and one of the times of the week that you look forward to, and it makes me quite sad to hear that you don't feel that way today. So what I just want to share is we're figuring out the rules as we go along of how best to make this a supportive place for everyone. And today that might not have felt that way. And Larry and I are going to figure out with your input. We're always happy to take everyone's advice about how to make it more safe and how to make it feel supportive so that we all can benefit from this. So I just want to share that before we talk about anything else, that we're going to figure out how to learn from the experience and the difficult chat that it seems like a lot of you had today, and we're going to figure out how to best make this a more supportive place. Larry, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, but we're trying to do our best.
I'm massively behind on the chat, and I've been trying to catch up, and then we went to K3, and I had stopped to talk about that and try to remember why that was relevant, and make it relevant. Because if I wasn't breaking rules, it was almost a case where other people maybe thought I was breaking rules when I wasn't, if following protocol kind of fit, established protocol. Maybe that would have been even a more broader term to use. But I just remembered feeling that I was in a friction point, because I was doing something totally normal and something that was necessary and required. I even had a financial contract to do, and I had people perceiving me as being, out of control or breaking rules or trying to cut corners and find shortcuts. And sometimes, I guess my point there was, sometimes we might break rules or we might find shortcuts around things, and somebody, a by the booker, might say, you're messing up. But for the bigger picture on things, we're doing exactly what we need to do, as long as we're pretty grounded. And please find me all the right psych babble words to say this. But if we're grounded in what we think we're doing and we're getting feedback from others at the same time, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one bureaucrat or the few. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm gonna try to catch up with.
Yeah, so what I was going to say for the away mission here is I was going to actually talk about how to talk to other folks when it seems like we might be following different rules here. So maybe that is very appropriate for today's conversation. Larry, it's quite difficult to have conversations with folks who might be following a very different rule set and a very different framework. Most people really do care about safety and health and education and opportunity and making sure that everyone has access to those things. However, how we think we can best do that, there is diversity there on what we think is the best way to promote health and to promote the economy and to promote safety and to promote education. There's a lot of diversity there. So the away mission I was actually going to recommend, if people are in a position to want to have these discussions of how people are approaching rules differently, to start those discussions with, why do you think this is so important to me? Why do you think that the thing I am doing is so important to me? Yeah, step back because it flips a perspective a bit because it forces you to think about things from the other person's perspective. And a
I,
lot of times, yeah, go ahead, Larry.
no, I was going to say the I have a MA in theater is my graduate degree, but the biggest mind paradigm shift in my own mind from grad school was like always re-examining your assumptions, your assumptions, your assumptions, your assumptions.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
whether it's creative, artistic, or whether it's interpersonal and diplomatic, you can it's like exactly what you're saying. You're just going where here's your base of understanding, and you're going forward. If you're really in conflict with somebody, if you're trying to figure out a way to proceed with somebody creatively or diplomatically, whatever the situation is,
Yeah.
however the iteration, step back and maybe examine them and your own. Like,
Yeah.
think about why you're doing what are you basing all this on that's been so unexamined that you've totally, and when you I'm actually thinking this because this it could be the way your family always did it, or the way you were raised, or the time period you were raised in, or something happened to you that when you were 4 or 8, and not a trauma, but something happened and you've always reacted otherwise to it, and maybe that's what you're doing. But anyway, it's like, take the blinders off. Don't be the deer in the headlights. And if you can, if you get to an impasse, back up and, re-examine what all is in your toolbox and what's in your rearview mirror and your assumptions.
And that is very hard to do. It is very hard to do, and sometimes it's painful to do that. And sometimes you become aware of things that are quite difficult to tackle. And so that's one piece of advice I want to give people is that it's okay to not have these conversations with a wide variety of people in your life. They're hard conversations to have, and they're important. They are also difficult. So if you are going to have a conversation with someone whose rules and the way they're approaching things is vastly different than you, there has to be clear motivation behind it. And if there is, if it's someone you work with, if it's someone you have to encounter on a regular basis, if it's someone who you think you can really learn from, or if it's someone you love, a family member, anything like that, your child's teacher, whoever it might be, starting that conversation with, why do you think this thing is so important to me? Because it allows you to do a lot of what Larry was talking about, of exploring those motivations that you might not be aware that are there.
And you know what? I wasn't even talking. I could tell you immediately took that to a deep counseling therapy kind of level.
It's what I do.
I was just talking about surface things that we can even, like, if we just took a moment to stop and breathe and like when you lose something and you retrace your steps to see where where it might be. I was just thinking, like, okay, a basic retrace your step, whether it's like over the last month or the last 5 years or since you were 10 or something. But I didn't mean like something that was going to require, although sometimes having a second person, third person point of view or memory, is helpful to get there faster. But yes, obviously, a therapist, a counselor to dig out the deep stuff and make a huge change. But I was talking about just like in a one-to-one point with somebody on a particular issue, and maybe you can, if it's a pattern of behavior, yes, obviously that's probably something else too.
Yeah, I agree. And with that, let's open up those hailing frequencies. Larry, there's been a very recent discussion about theater majors. And that I like how Scott.
You guys are also way ahead of me. I'm like, I'll come back in 10 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna.
Scott said, I was a theater major and a psychology minor in college. The show's like watching two halves of my brain. So Larry, you definitely have a theater background, and I took one theater class in college. My last, I went to a quarter school, and so my last quarter of college was a theater class, and I was actually in a play. I was in one play. And,
the way you said that, I was actually in a play. Okay.
I'm just
and gave me the keys, and I.
That's my way of saying I don't have theater cred, although I love Broadway, as is obvious from my horrible singing. I don't have a lot of theater cred, but I have a tiny little morsel of it. That's just what I wanted to share with Scott. I got a little bit.
Okay. Well, you do well on camera, so there's some kind of a connection. Well,
it's teaching. Teaching is theater. And I have a lot of experience with teaching. I did speech and debate too. And so theatrics and communicating emotion and capturing attention and
compressing thoughts and emotions and expression, and compressing that and then focusing it is
that is great teaching, great pedagogical a great pedagogical approach is to harness a lot. It's one of my favorite words. It just kind of means like teaching methods, pedagogy, but it's a lot of good teaching is good theater. Unfortunately, a lot of bad politics is theater as well.
Yes.
Oh my god.
Andrew Jackson, Huey Long, and modern cases. The advent of TV has just made it all worse. But it was bad enough when it was live.
Mark says voice acting and RPG playing helped me to overcome it. So shy actors isn't that uncommon. So that's a really great point. I think, Larry, for a lot of people, theater and also RPG, whether it is Star Trek Adventures or something like Dungeons and Dragons, for a lot of people, that structure helps them to overcome anxiety they might have about performing. And I completely agree with that, Mark. It was a public speaking class that helped me overcome a lifetime of social anxiety that I had. So I'm right there with you, Mark.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Now I'm getting into the chat. Okay, now I'm catching up.
Oh my gosh. Let's see.
We're gobsmacked.
While we're here in the chat, folks, let us know what we're thinking of doing an evening watch of Star Trek First Contact. I know that might not be the best for folks who are on the European side, because that might end up being an early morning watch of Star Trek First Contact. However, our current plans are next Saturday. We're gonna continue the same approach, which is we're gonna take that week's new episode of Star Trek, which will now be Star Trek Discovery, in a non-spoiler way, use that to inspire that week's theme, which will also have to be something that helps us to boldly go in our own lives. So it's always a tall order. We want to take your feedback for ideas for that theme. But we also want to do this watch party, as many of you have requested, having these watch-alongs where we're just all watching a piece of Star Trek together. We did that with Insurrection. We did that with, what was the Deep Space Nine episode? It's Only a Paper Moon, Larry, was the episode we did.
Right.
Now, based on your vote, we're going to do First Contact. So if you could let us know if there's a day of the week that your preference is, Larry and I will see what we can do. That being said, Larry, you were very busy this week. Can you share with us some of the things you've got going on this week?
I will, but I just wanted to add on to what you said, guys. What we were looking at in the big picture was, right now we have, knowing that not everybody is subscribing and watching, but also knowing that we were really limited on Lower Decks because we know everybody across the pond wasn't able to see it at all. You didn't even have the choice, unless, of course, you bent the rules and went to the greater good of keeping up with your Star Trek somehow. Wait a second. There's a method down here right underneath this table. So Discovery is back to being on most global back on its global feed. So on one hand, we're a little bit relieved there. But the big picture here was, we thought while there's new Trek coming out, that in the big picture is we've had 10 weeks and 13 weeks. And then who knows how long it will be until we have that resource, that tool, and we can go back, we can return to our original format totally. We can come up with other things. We can do more watch-alongs. But rather than put all of that off for 13 weeks, A, we decided to do a watch-along sooner than then and out of our normal time slot. And B, go ahead and while we have the luxury of some new Trek, which is not open to everybody, but at least it's open to way more people than we
Yeah.
have been, to go ahead and use that while we have it. But
Yes.
but Ollie and I keep talking about, we have some other formats in mind that
Yeah, we've got a lot of
we have
ideas.
some other things too that are like not even bloody A, B, C, or D here on the multiple choice so far.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to share with that, folks. I don't think we talk about this enough, Larry. But you and I really enjoy Life Support Live for a lot of, I think, different reasons, and I'll let you speak to your own. But for me, I don't have a ton of time in my week where I get to really celebrate Star Trek and talk about these big ideas. So for me, the connection with this community here is just a ton of fun. And honestly, folks, we need as much fun and joy and community as we can get. So for me, this has been a wonderful way for me to stay connected with something that I love so much and has given my life so much meaning. And Larry, you shared with me some of the things that you really like about Life Support Live and how different it is from the different conversations you have usually about Star Trek.
Right. Well, no, yes. This is an aspect of Star Trek that I said in the beginning, I always took for granted. Well, of course, it's about a positive future and aspirational. That's what Star Trek is. Gene said, if we didn't change our ways and become, more respectful, more diverse, more, less narrow-minded, all these things, of course we would blow ourselves up. Of course we'd poison the planet. Of course we couldn't have cool future space gadget techno because we would have killed ourselves off by then. So if we're going to have a future set 300 years in the future, of course we're going to do this. And, all the extensions of, if others are doing the same thing, they probably didn't do the same things to their own cultures, if they're spacefaring. And the whole aliens show up to eat us and conquer us thing, whatever, maybe. But basically, so much of what I just bypassed to get to the cool parts of Star Trek I like, which was the world building and the backgrounding and the making of, but it's the thing that set most of fandom up, the women, and mostly women who were fan fiction writing off the relationships and now shipping, we'd say. But all that end of it, I was like, well, yeah, of course. Now, over here. So Life Support has got me back in touch with a lot of the core of that at the same time, hopefully. And I don't know, it's like, it makes me feel like I'm using all of my Star Trek muscles and not just, how far up the sleeve is the cuff braid on a 2283 uniform for left-handed Tellarites who, don't speak Orion? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's when...
That's why I love it. Yeah.
I think Life Support Live works
and the
best.
Collaboration. I just enjoyed the collaboration opposed to, yeah.
Oh, I agree. I think, Larry, Life Support Live works best when you and I and our community are all getting a new perspective on something at the same time. And when I might say something that gives you a different perspective, and then you come back with a very different perspective, and our community brings up examples that we haven't thought of, that's when I think we're all really connecting and learning and growing and having so much fun in the process. So this is my very long way of saying, folks, we're not going anywhere. We've got plans to see out the season of Star Trek Discovery, and then we have other ideas of things that we want to do with Life Support Live. And hopefully we'll have more to say about this in the near future, but a member of the Life Support Live community has been helping us to get the podcast up. We want to talk a lot more about that once we get that up. It's been slowed down largely because of me, and I've been slower to move forward on those kind of things. But folks, we're not going anywhere. We want to celebrate. I know. We want to celebrate. You're wearing Command Red today, and I'm still in Science Blue.
This is Crimson and Cream, I'll have you know. Come on.
It looks a lot like the maroon motion picture era Starfleet.
I am not a monster.
So we've got stuff cooking, folks. So we're not going anywhere. We're going to see out Star Trek Discovery and have that inspire our themes. I'm a little nervous about how we're going to get individual themes from more of a serialized storytelling. Lower Decks has been much more serialized or more episodic, and now we're going serialized with Disco. So we'll see what happens.
But
But
it's going to be a much different mood and tone. I'm actually I may be the most excited for Discovery than I've ever been so far, just because I think
yes, me too.
they may finally find their niche. We'll see.
I
We'll
I
see.
agree, and I hope so. Jared keeps saying Patreon. Jared really wants us to start a Patreon. And folks, if you would like to support us in that way, let us know if you'd like a Patreon. The other thing that Jared mentioned as well is Slumber Party with Ali and Larry, and that might be the right way to think about
At the
watching First
Goatee in
Contact.
Glendale. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
on the grounds. Yeah, which is now I don't know
Oh,
the corner of a Barnes and Noble, but you have to go to the inside to get in the front door. I don't know.
yeah.
Um,
Well, folks, let me, Larry. I want to hear about what you've got going on this week, and I'm gonna prompt you with this image right over here.
yeah.
So
Well, a
tell us
lot of
about
people.
Virtual
Yeah.
TrekCon.
It's for a pandemic. There sure is a lot still happening. So a lot of you've heard that it's just barely getting advertised. Just been the last couple of weeks. They're doing it this weekend of October. But Ryan and Sirach and all the folks behind the Seventh World Podcast are doing another one of their virtual Trek cons. And thanks to my overwhelm this time, not yours, Dr. Ali, we we were welcomed, invited to do a panel that I didn't follow up on. So we aren't doing a panel. I'm not doing a panel of any kind. However, this edition of Virtual TrekCon will have virtual booths. I was part of a little experimental convention last summer in June during the first wave, and we had virtual booths one day for 3 hours. This is 90 minutes over 5 days, the same 5 days that the panels are running. But there's 90 minutes when I don't know how many people are going to have like a virtual dealer's room booth. So yes, Trekland, Portal 47 and all that. The hours are different day by day because they're trying to appeal to different parts of have some different parts of the day and others so they can get different parts of the world in, as well as keep the Americas included. So anyway, those times are coming up. But that's this next coming weekend,
Yeah.
Thursday, Sunday.
Let me put that
I'll
back
have all
on.
the information. Yeah. This
Yeah.
is the times when my booth is going, but that's basically the time when all the booths are going, unless they've tweaked the time in the last couple of days.
Yeah.
So aside
Libby,
from the panels that you'll see advertised, there's a virtual dealer's room going on. So come by and visit me. We'll have the address up. You can come to my site and see it all too.
One quick thing, Libby just asked, would Patreon keep this free for those who can't afford expenses right now? So Libby, just one thing I want to say is we always want to, life support live will always be free. That's never gonna change. This is a completely free thing. Larry and I don't make any money off of it. We don't want to make any money off of it. This is a free thing we're doing for you. If you want to support us, there are ways to do that. So, for example, this is an assist, Larry. That is with a sport vernacular here. I'm going to put this up and enlarge it right over here. One way to support Larry is through Portal 47. And even backing up there, if you don't follow Larry on YouTube and on Trekland, follow Larry. That's one of the easiest ways to support Larry. And if you'd like to do more and get more in return, Portal 47 is a wonderful way. So Larry, can you tell us about this?
Yeah, well, this is every year. This is the 5th anniversary for Portal 47. Every year on the anniversary, I have an open house. We basically have a huge glorified version of our guest night, only we invite the whole world to come in. And I kind of put top tier guests there. And we're going to announce who the guest is here in the next week. I've got it to 2. But this is above and beyond what the normal 47 subscribers are portales, as we say. But this has been my business for the last 5 years, and I'm branching out, adding other tiers, and now I'm doing the day tours, which we can't do during the pandemic. But that's actually my business. I do have a little Patreon that I talk about on Tuesdays. I keep it very simple and tiny, and it's to expand my online network here, just for people who don't subscribe, who are not in the portal, but they want to support me. But I keep it to like there's a $5 and a $10 level, and it's under Tuesdays live at Patreon if anybody wants to go. I didn't put a clip in. But the open house, you can go right to LarryNemecek.com right now, click in, save a seat, just so I know what the numbers are getting to be, and then you'll get the information when we announce the guest, which I'll also be promoting everywhere when that's happening. But that's the last Wednesday of the month here at the night. That also overlaps what we were talking about, our watch along.
Yeah.
This time right now allows us to, and you saw with those virtual booths, this time of the day allows us to get most of the globe that we can comfortably for everybody in some way or another. Going at night on the North American time, I know cuts out people across the pond, but it's that same dilemma. But that's what we're looking at doing on our watch along here that we're talking about doing. And that is when most of our Portal events are. Although in Portal, I started when I said we had 6 European members, I started doing a noontime Pacific, so it's like 8 p.m. British, 9 p.m. Central Europe. We have a special European session roundtable, Ask Dr. Trek, just for the Europeans, and it's the middle of the day for Americans, so they can come in there too. So anyway, yeah, so that's.
And if people want to support my work, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to the Psych Show. It's free. You can subscribe, and then you'll be getting my content there. If you'd like to do a little bit more, and if there's a video that really you found helpful, to share that. That is how my channel has grown, and that's the biggest and easiest way to support the work I do, is just to share it with people who you think might get a lot of benefits from it. My latest video is about coping, and what I did, Larry, is I took every coping skill I have and I put it into my backpack. It was kind of a challenge. I wanted to see if I could fit everything in my backpack, and then I kind of take it out and show you what I use and how I use it. So really easy, simple video. I've got a lot more coming out. I've got a lot filmed that just need to be edited, and I'm getting back into the habit of getting those out. So easiest way to support me, and if you want to support me even more, I also have a Patreon for folks who want more access and more information. That's why I've been hesitant to think about a Patreon for Life Support Live, Larry, because this is something we do for our own joy and our own mental health and for all of yours. So I really I'm hesitant to do more with it, but the greatest way to support Life Support Live is to tell more folks about it, to share these episodes, and hopefully soon in the future we're going to have the podcast episodes, which has all the archives, and to share that with folks once that's up. That's the easiest way. Larry, I feel exhausted today. You and I both had very long weeks.
Yeah.
You had a very long night. You're doing something very cool. Larry's doing something very cool that I don't know if he can talk about, but it's something that the whole Trek community.
Next week, yes.
You can talk about it next week.
It's small, but at the same time, it's very big and cool. So I'll talk about it next week. I don't even know how it's gonna be presented, so I want to wait and see how the final product happens before I talk about it. So.
Yeah.
But it just blew up in my lap. I say blew up in a good way. It just blew up in my lap the last 2-3 days. So
I'm very excited to see that and to be able to talk about it. Larry, between now and then, how can people stay in touch, and how can people find out about that thing that you're doing right now once it's been done?
I will probably talk about, just go to LarryNemecek.com, and I will probably blog about it on the day of. But also follow me on Twitter at Larry Nemecek. That's where I'm really kind of the most active these days. But I try to be pretty on Instagram too, which is the same account as my Trek Facebook, which is Larry Nemecek's Trekland. So between Twitter and my webpage, my homepage at LarryNemecek.com, which again is where you can go grab a seat right now. It's free for our open house.
I think Glenn already signed up for that while we were talking. And Glenn, thank you too. You also said make sure you subscribe to a YouTube channel, like each video, and comment. Glenn, thank you for saying that. Those are the metrics that really tell the YouTube's algorithm, hey, someone really likes this video. Yeah. So
this
that
guy
goes a long way.
This guy has an incredible YouTube channel. I got into it late, so everybody that can go over and subscribe and comment on my videos, which includes this. The replay of this on YouTube is on my page. Also, my Tuesday Trekland Lives are there. My older interviews, and as soon as things settle down, I've got a whole stack of new videos from the last 2 or 3 years that have not been touched that I need to, with a lot of guest stars, with a lot of people. Those are way overdue, as their managers keep reminding me.
So, folks,
to get put out.
The sad music means this week is coming to an end. But folks, we'll be back in another week with the season premiere of Star Trek Discovery. Until then, live long and prosper, my friends.
Oh, are we there? Trek well, everybody.